The cold bit at Willow Lambert's skin as she stared at her reflection in the cloudy mirror of her tiny boarding house room. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Tonight would be her first performance at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Leadville, Colorado, and though every fiber of her being revolted at what she was about to do, she had no choice. Not if she wanted to survive. Leadville, 1881. The mining boom had transformed this mountain town into a hub of silver prospectors, businessmen, and those looking to profit from both. At 22, Willow had arrived just 3 weeks ago with dreams of teaching at the newly established school. Those dreams had crumbled when she discovered the position had been filled, leaving her stranded with dwindling funds and no prospects. "You have pretty eyes," the saloon owner, Mr. Barton, had told her when she desperately inquired about any work. "The miners would pay good money to watch you dance." His gaze had traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, but her empty purse and growling stomach had forced her hand. She pinned her auburn hair up, leaving a few curls to frame her face as Mr. Barton had instructed. Her mother would be heartbroken to see her like this, dressed in a borrowed costume with a neckline that plunged far lower than anything she'd ever worn. But her mother was gone, buried in the Kansas soil alongside her father after the typhoid took them both last spring. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. "10 minutes, Miss Lambert," called the gruff voice of Mr. Barton. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The walk to the saloon felt like a march to the gallows. February snow crunched beneath her boots, the bitter cold a welcome distraction from her thoughts. The setting sun cast long shadows across the muddy main street of Leadville, where saloons and gambling houses stood alongside mercantiles and assay offices. The Silver Dollar Saloon was already bustling when she slipped through the back entrance. Piano music mingled with raucous laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional curse as a card game went sour. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of whiskey. "There she is," Mr. Barton said, emerging from the shadows. He was a short man with a protruding belly and small, calculating eyes. "Our new entertainment. The boys are mighty eager to see you, Miss Lambert." "I just dance," she said firmly, "nothing more." He gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, for now." Her stomach turned. She'd heard stories about dance hall girls who started out just dancing and ended up selling far more than their talent on stage. She wouldn't become one of them. This was temporary just until she could save enough to move on. "Here," Mr. Barton said, handing her a small glass of amber liquid. "For your nerves." She shook her head. "No, thank you," he shrugged. "Suit yourself, you're on in 5 minutes." The backstage area was little more than a curtained-off corner. She could hear the men on the other side, their voices growing louder as they drank more. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her costume one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen." Mr. Barton's voice boomed from the other side of the curtain. "The Silver Dollar Saloon is proud to present our newest entertainment. All the way from Kansas City, the beautiful, the talented, Miss Willow." The curtain was pulled back, and suddenly she was facing a sea of leering faces. The piano player struck up a lively tune, and Willow forced her feet to move. She danced at socials back home, but never like this. Never with men watching her every move with hungry eyes. She focused on the music, trying to block out the whistles and crude comments. A minute into her performance, a man in the front row reached for her ankle. She deftly stepped away, maintaining her smile though her heart pounded with fear. "Come closer, darlin'," someone shouted. "Show us more," called another. The calls grew more insistent, more vulgar. Willow's cheeks burned with humiliation as she continued to dance, each second stretching like an hour. When a half-empty bottle of whiskey crashed near her feet, she startled but didn't stop. Then, through the haze of smoke and bodies, she locked eyes with a man standing at the bar. Unlike the others, he wasn't shouting or leering. He watched her with an intensity that was different, concerned rather than predatory. He was tall with broad shoulders, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered with dark stubble. Another bottle flew past her head, followed by the crash of glass breaking against the wall behind her. The piano player faltered, but Mr. Barton yelled for him to keep playing. "Take it off," someone shouted, and others joined in the chant. Panic rose in her throat. This wasn't what she had agreed to. She looked desperately toward Mr. Barton, but he merely raised an eyebrow and gestured for her to continue. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. The music stopped abruptly, and the saloon fell silent. The man she'd noticed at the bar now stood in the center of the room, his revolver pointed at the ceiling. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but carrying throughout the room. "Show's over." Mr. Barton pushed through the crowd. "Now see here, mister." "You can't just," I said, the man repeated, lowering his gun to point at the floor but making his intention clear. "The show's over." He was even taller up close, his shoulders broader. His eyes, she now saw, were a deep blue that reminded her of the sky just before dusk. "Who the hell are you?" Barton demanded. "Dawson Hayes." The name carried weight. Willow could tell by the way several men shifted nervously. "U.S. Marshal." Mr. Barton's face paled slightly. "Marshal Hayes, I didn't recognize you, clearly." Marshal Hayes holstered his weapon and turned to face the crowd. "I suggest you gentlemen find somewhere else to be. This establishment is closed for the evening." There were grumbles and protests, but one by one, the patrons filed out. Some cast angry glances at the marshal, others at Willow, but none challenged him directly. When the last man had stumbled out into the night, Marshal Hayes turned to Mr. Barton. "You and I need to have a conversation about your business practices." Barton's eyes darted to Willow, then back to the marshal. "She agreed to dance. Ain't nothing illegal about that." "We'll discuss the finer points of coercion another time," Hayes said coldly. "Right now, I suggest you make yourself scarce." Once Barton had retreated to his office, Marshal Hayes approached Willow, who still stood frozen on the small stage. His movements were deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now. She realized she was trembling. "Yes, thank you." He removed his coat and held it out to her. "Here." Gratefully, she wrapped the warm garment around her shoulders, covering the revealing costume. It smelled of leather, pine, and something distinctly masculine. "Dawson Hayes," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated before placing her hand in his much larger one. "Willow Lambert." "Miss Lambert," he nodded. "May I escort you somewhere safe?" She bit her lip. "I have a room at Mrs. Watson's boarding house, but..." The thought of facing Mr. Barton again tomorrow made her stomach churn. "But you're concerned about repercussions," he finished for her. "Yes." She wrapped the coat tighter around herself. "I needed the work. I don't have anywhere else to go." He considered this for a moment. "I might have a solution if you're willing to hear it." She nodded cautiously. "The schoolteacher's assistant left town unexpectedly last week. The school board's been looking for a replacement." Hope fluttered in her chest. "I came to Leadville to teach. I have references. I believe you." He offered his arm. "If you'd allow me, I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Bennett. She runs the school." Willow looked at his extended arm, then up at his face. There was nothing in his expression that suggested ulterior motives, only a genuine desire to help. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. His eyes softened slightly. "Let's just say I've seen too many young women forced into situations like yours. If I can prevent it, I will." She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt sleeve. "Thank you, Marshal Hayes." "Dawson," he corrected gently. "Just Dawson." As they stepped out into the cold night air, snowflakes beginning to fall around them, Willow felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The snow had picked up by the time they reached Mrs. Bennett's modest home on the east side of town. Willow felt out of place in her dance costume, even with Dawson's coat covering most of it. But the marshal seemed unconcerned as he knocked on the front door. Mrs. Bennett was a stout woman in her 50s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Willow and ushered them both inside without question. "Clara," Dawson said, removing his hat, "this is Miss Willow Lambert. She came to Leadville hoping to teach." Mrs. Bennett's eyes assessed Willow carefully. "Is that so?" "Yes, madam," Willow said, trying to stand tall despite her embarrassment. "I was a teacher's assistant back in Kansas for 2 years." She's had a difficult evening, Dawson explained, his tone conveying much without saying anything explicit. I thought perhaps you could help. Understanding dawned in Mrs. Bennet's eyes. Of course. Margaret, put on some tea, she called to a young woman who had appeared in the doorway. Turning back to Willow, she said, let's find you something more suitable to wear, dear. Half an hour later, Willow sat in Mrs. Bennet's kitchen wearing a borrowed dress and sipping hot tea. She'd washed her face clean of the rouge Mr. Barton had insisted she wear and pinned her hair more modestly. Dawson had waited in the parlor, and when she emerged looking more like herself, something in his expression had shifted, a subtle softening around his eyes that made her heart beat a little faster. Miss Lambert was telling me about her teaching experience, Mrs. Bennet said as she poured Dawson a cup of tea. She's qualified, and heaven knows we need the help. Then you'll consider her for the position, Dawson asked. Consider her, I'm offering it to her now. Mrs. Bennet turned to Willow. The pay isn't much, mind you, but it comes with a room at the teacherage next to the school. Willow nearly dropped her teacup. Really, but don't you need references? My papers are at the boarding house. Dawson's word is reference enough for me, Mrs. Bennet said, giving the marshal a fond look that suggested a long acquaintance. Besides, I've been teaching long enough to know a decent person when I meet one. Gratitude welled up in Willow's chest. Thank you, I don't know what to say. Say you'll start Monday, Mrs. Bennet replied with a smile. The children are quite a handful, but I think you'll manage. I'd be honored. Mrs. Bennet stood. It's settled then. You can stay here tonight, and tomorrow we'll collect your things from the boarding house. I'd be happy to accompany you, Dawson offered. In case Mr. Barton decides to make things difficult, Willow nodded, relief washing over her. Thank you both. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. By being a good teacher, Mrs. Bennet said simply. Now I'll show you to the guest room. You must be exhausted. After Mrs. Bennet had shown her to a small but comfortable room and bid her good night, Willow found herself standing in the hallway as Dawson prepared to leave. I can't thank you enough, she said softly, conscious of the late hour. He placed his hat on his head. No need for thanks. I'm just glad you're safe. Will I see you tomorrow to collect my things? I'll be here at 10 if that suits you, she nodded. It does. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Lambert. Good night, Marshal Hayes, she paused. Dawson. A small smile touched his lips as he turned and walked out into the snowy night. Willow closed the door and leaned against it, her mind replaying the events of the evening. Hours ago, she had been preparing to dance for the entertainment of drunken men, seeing no way out of her desperate situation. Now she had a teaching position, a place to live, and the support of kind strangers. And then there was Dawson Hayes, the marshal with the intense blue eyes who had stepped in when no one else would. She couldn't explain the flutter in her chest when she thought of him, but she knew one thing for certain. For the first time since arriving in Leadville, she felt safe. The next morning, Willow woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the events of the previous night came flooding back. Relief washed over her anew as she realized she wouldn't have to return to the Silver Dollar Saloon after a simple breakfast with Mrs. Bennet, during which the older woman told her more about the school and her duties as an assistant. Willow found herself watching the clock, waiting for Dawson's arrival. At precisely 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Bennet answered it, and Dawson stepped inside, removing his hat. He wore a dark coat over a blue shirt, his marshal's badge pinned to his vest. In the daylight, she could see his features more clearly, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the scar that cut through his right eyebrow. "Good morning, ladies," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Good morning, Marshal," Mrs. Bennet replied. "Miss Lambert is ready whenever you are." Willow nodded. "I don't have much to collect, just a carpet bag with some clothes and books." "We'll make it quick," Dawson assured her. The walk to Mrs. Watson's boarding house was brisk, the morning air crisp with lingering winter. Leadville's streets were busy with morning traffic, miners heading to the silver mines in the hills, merchants opening their shops, children playing in the snow. "Thank you again for escorting me," Willow said as they walked side by side. It's no trouble. He glanced at her. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in weeks, she admitted. I've been so worried about money and finding work. I haven't had a peaceful night's sleep since I arrived in Leadville. And before that, he asked, what brought you here from Kansas? She was touched by his genuine interest. My parents died last spring, typhoid. After the farm was sold to pay their debts, there wasn't much left. I heard Leadville was booming, that there were opportunities here. I'm sorry about your parents, he said quietly. Thank you. She looked up at him. What about you? Have you always been a marshal? A shadow passed over his face. No, I fought in the war, then drifted for a while. Took the badge about 5 years ago. Do you like it? Being a marshal, he considered the question. Most days, I like helping people, making sure the law is followed. There's a lot of gray areas, though. Like last night, she guessed. He nodded. What Barton was doing, making you dance like that, it's not exactly illegal. Unsavory, but not illegal. Yet you stopped it. Some things are wrong even if they're not against the law. His jaw tightened. No one should be forced to do what you were doing. They reached the boarding house, a 3-story building with peeling paint and sagging steps. Mrs. Watson, a thin woman with a perpetual frown, met them at the door. Miss Lambert, she said, her tone disapproving. I was beginning to think you weren't coming back, and with the marshal, no less. Good morning, Mrs. Watson, Willow said politely. I've come to collect my things. I'll be moving to the teacherage. Mrs. Watson's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Well, your room's as you left it, though Mr. Barton came by earlier looking for you, seemed quite upset. Willow's stomach clenched. Dawson must have noticed her tension because he placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Did he say anything specific? Dawson asked. Just that he wanted a word with Miss Lambert, said she'd left without proper notice. Mrs. Watson's eyes narrowed. I run a respectable establishment, Marshal. I don't want any trouble. There won't be any, Dawson assured her. Miss Lambert has done nothing wrong. They climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor where Willow's small room was located at the end of the hallway. Inside, her meager possessions were just as she had left them. This won't take long, she said, pulling her carpet bag from under the bed. She quickly packed her clothes, a framed photograph of her parents, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a few books. As she reached for her hairbrush on the small dresser, she noticed something was missing. My locket, she said, scanning the room. It was here on the dresser. Dawson frowned. Are you sure? Positive. It was my mother's, the only piece of jewelry I kept. She lifted the thin mattress, checked under the bed. It's gone. When Mr. Barton came by, Dawson said slowly, did Mrs. Watson say if he came up here? Willow's face paled. You think he took it? It's possible. He might have been looking for leverage to get you to come back. The thought made her feel ill. That locket was all I had left of her. Determination hardened Dawson's features. We'll get it back. They finished gathering her things, and Dawson carried her carpet bag downstairs. After Willow settled her account with Mrs. Watson, they stepped back out into the street. I should take these to the teacherage first, Willow said, gesturing to her bag. Of course. Then, if you're willing, we can pay a visit to Mr. Barton. The thought of confronting the saloon owner made her nervous, but the desire to recover her mother's locket outweighed her fear. I'm willing. The teacherage was a small but well-maintained cottage next to the schoolhouse on the eastern edge of town. Mrs. Bennet met them there, showing Willow to her room, larger and much nicer than the one at the boarding house, with a view of the mountains to the east. It's lovely, Willow said, taking in the simple furnishings: a bed with a colorful quilt, a small writing desk, a wardrobe, and a rocking chair by the window. I'm glad you like it, Mrs. Bennet said. The other room belongs to Miss Taylor, the primary teacher. She's visiting her sister in Denver this week, but you'll meet her when she returns. After unpacking her few belongings, Willow joined Dawson outside. Ready? He asked. She took a deep breath. Ready. They walked back toward the center of town, the sun now high in the sky. Dawson was quiet, his expression thoughtful. What's your plan? Willow asked. I'll ask him directly about the locket. If he denies taking it, I'll request to search his office. Can you do that? Legally, I mean, not without cause. But Barton knows I've been watching his establishment for other reasons. He might cooperate to avoid further scrutiny. What other reasons? Dawson hesitated. There have been rumors about girls going missing, nothing concrete but enough to concern me, Willow shivered. Missing. Sold to houses in bigger cities from what I've heard. Denver, San Francisco, his voice was grim. I haven't been able to prove anything yet. The Silver Dollar Saloon was quieter during the day with just a few regulars nursing drinks at the bar. The piano was silent, the stage empty. Mr. Barton stood behind the bar and his eyes widened when he saw Willow enter with Dawson. Marshal, he said, his tone wary. Miss Lambert, what brings you back so soon? A missing item, Dawson said, approaching the bar. A locket belonging to Miss Lambert disappeared from her room at the boarding house this morning. Around the same time you were there asking after her. Barton's face reddened. Are you accusing me of theft, Marshal? I'm giving you the opportunity to return what isn't yours. The saloon owner's eyes darted to Willow, then back to Dawson. I don't know what you're talking about. In that case, Dawson said, his voice hardening, I'd like to take a look around your office. You need a warrant for that. Do I? Dawson raised an eyebrow. I could come back with one, along with some questions about those girls from Pueblo who worked here briefly last fall. The ones no one's seen since. Barton's face paled. He glanced around the saloon, then back at Dawson. Fine, my office, but just you. Miss Lambert comes too. It's her property we're discussing. The saloon owner looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. This way. He led them through a door behind the bar to a small, cluttered office. Papers and ledgers were stacked haphazardly on a desk, alongside a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a dirty glass. I don't have her locket, Barton insisted, closing the door behind them. Then you won't mind if we look around, Dawson said, already moving toward the desk. Barton watched nervously as the marshal methodically checked drawers and shelves. Willow's eyes were drawn to a small wooden box on a shelf behind the desk. It was ornate, with intricate carvings that seemed out of place among Barton's other possessions. What's in that box? She asked, pointing. Barton shifted uncomfortably. Nothing important, just some papers. Dawson reached for the box. You won't mind if I check then? Now, wait just a minute, but Dawson had already opened it. Inside, nestled among several other pieces of jewelry, was Willow's silver locket. Nothing important. Dawson asked, lifting the locket from the box. Barton's face flushed with anger. Fine, I took it, but she owes me. I paid for that costume she was wearing, paid the piano player. She ran out before earning her keep. I agreed to dance for one night, Willow said, her voice stronger than she expected. I never agreed to continue, especially not when your patrons were throwing bottles at me and demanding I remove my clothes. Dawson handed her the locket, his fingers brushing against hers. I think we're done here, Mr. Barton, unless Miss Lambert wants to press charges for theft. Willow clutched the locket to her chest, feeling its familiar weight. No, I have what I came for, Barton sneered. You're making a mistake, girl. You could have earned good money here. At what cost? She replied, looking him directly in the eye. My dignity, my safety. Get used to being poor then, he spat. Teaching doesn't pay much in this town. Better poor than under your thumb, she said, turning to leave. Dawson followed her out of the office and through the saloon. Once they were outside in the fresh air, he asked, Are you all right? She nodded, opening the locket to reveal tiny portraits of her parents. I am now, thank you. May I? He asked, gesturing to the locket. She handed it to him, and he examined the small portraits. You have your mother's eyes. The observation touched her. That's what my father always said. Dawson carefully closed the locket and returned it to her. Let me help you put it on. She turned, lifting her hair as he fastened the delicate chain around her neck. His fingers were surprisingly gentle for such large hands, and she felt a shiver run down her spine at his touch. There, he said softly. When she turned to face him again, something in his expression made her heart skip. It suits you. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, until a passing wagon broke the spell. I should get back to the teacherage, Willow said. Mrs. Bennett mentioned she'd show me around the school this afternoon. Of course, he hesitated. Would it be all right if I called on you? Perhaps tomorrow evening, warmth spread through her chest. I'd like that very much. Until tomorrow, then. He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but not before she caught the smile that lit up his face. As she watched him walk away, Willow touched the locket at her throat. In just 24 hours, her life in Leadville had been completely transformed, and somehow she knew this was just the beginning. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Bennett showed Willow around the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a small library of well-worn books. She learned that she would be assisting with the younger children while Miss Taylor taught the older ones, and occasionally teaching lessons herself. "The children are eager to meet you," Mrs. Bennett told her as they organized primers and slates on Sunday afternoon. "Especially since I mentioned you're from Kansas. Several of them have never been outside Colorado territory." "I hope I don't disappoint them," Willow said, arranging chalk on the teacher's desk. "You won't." Mrs. Bennett patted her hand. "Teaching is as much about caring as it is about knowledge. Anyone can see you have a good heart." The older woman's confidence bolstered her spirits, but as evening approached, Willow found herself growing increasingly nervous not about teaching, but about Dawson's visit. She changed her dress twice, finally settling on a simple blue one that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair up in a style that was neat but softer than the severe bun Mrs. Bennett favored. At 6 o'clock precisely, there was a knock at the teacherage door. Willow opened it to find Dawson standing on the porch, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and a dark vest. His dark hair was neatly combed, though one stubborn lock fell across his forehead. "Good evening," he said, his deep voice sending a pleasant shiver through her. "Good evening." She stepped back to let him in. "Please come in," he entered, looking slightly too large for the modest sitting room with its dainty furniture and crocheted doilies. "I brought you something," he said, revealing a small package he'd been holding behind his back. "You didn't have to do that," she protested, even as she accepted the gift. "I wanted to." He nodded toward the package. "Open it." She carefully unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small leather-bound book. "Poems by Emily Dickinson," she read, running her fingers over the embossed title. "How did you know I like poetry?" "I noticed the volume of Wordsworth in your room at the boarding house," he admitted. "The bookseller said this just arrived from back east. It's quite new, apparently." She was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, this is wonderful." "You're welcome." He glanced around the room. "Is Mrs. Bennett here?" "She's having dinner with the Reverend and his wife this evening." Willow realized how that might sound and quickly added, "But Miss Taylor is expected back from Denver tonight." He nodded, understanding her concern for propriety. "I thought perhaps we could walk to the hotel for dinner. The dining room there is quite nice." "I'd like that." She set the book carefully on a small table. "Let me get my shawl." The Harrison Hotel was the finest establishment in Leadville, a 3-story building with actual gaslights and a dining room that served food a step above the usual fare found in the town's restaurants and saloons. As they entered, Willow was conscious of the glances they received the marshal and the new schoolteacher, dining together. Dawson seemed unaffected by the attention, leading her to a table near a window that offered a view of the snow-covered street. A waiter quickly appeared to take their order, and soon they were enjoying roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. "How are you finding Leadville so far?" Dawson asked, after they'd exchanged pleasantries about the food and weather. "It's growing on me," she admitted. "When I first arrived, it seemed so rough and unwelcoming, but now I'm beginning to see its charm." "The town has come a long way in a short time," he said. "When I first came here 3 years ago, half these buildings didn't exist. The silver strike changed everything." "Have you always been a marshal here?" He shook his head. "I started in Denver, then worked in several small towns before being assigned to Leadville. The growth brought challenges. More people means more crime." "Is it dangerous?" she asked, thinking of his comment about missing girls. "It can be." His expression grew serious. "There are good people here, hardworking folks just trying to make a living, but there are others who prey on the vulnerable. Like Mr. Barton." "Yes." He took a sip of coffee. "Men like him see people, especially women, as commodities. Things to be used and discarded." The darkness in his tone suggested personal experience. You've seen it before, she guessed. He was quiet for a moment. My sister, he finally said. She was younger than me, just 17 when she ran away from home. Our father was harsh. She ended up in a place like Barton's in Denver. By the time I found her, she was. He trailed off, his jaw tight. Willow reached across the table to touch his hand. I'm sorry. He turned his hand over, briefly squeezing hers before releasing it. It was a long time ago. But it's why I do what I do, why I couldn't just walk past the Silver Dollar that night. I'm glad you didn't, she said softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went beyond mere words. The moment was broken by the arrival of apple pie for dessert. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics: Willow's nervousness about her first day of teaching, Dawson's stories about some of the more colorful residents of Leadville, their shared love of books and music. Do you play an instrument? She asked as they finished their pie. Poorly, he admitted with a smile. I have a harmonica that I torture occasionally. What about you? Piano, though it's been a while. My mother taught me. I'd like to hear you play sometime. There's a piano at the church, she said. Perhaps after services next Sunday, he nodded, pleased. I'd like that. After dinner, they walked slowly back toward the teacherage, the night crisp but clear. Stars spread across the sky in dazzling profusion, more brilliant here in the mountains than Willow had ever seen in Kansas. It's beautiful, she said, gazing upward. It is. But when she glanced at him, she found he wasn't looking at the stars. Heat rose to her cheeks. Thank you for dinner. I had a wonderful time, so did I. They had reached the teacherage, and he walked her to the door. May I call on you again, perhaps Wednesday evening? I'd like that. She hesitated, then added, actually, the school is having a picnic lunch on Friday. The children bring food to share, and parents often attend. Would you like to come? I wouldn't miss it. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Willow. Good night, Dawson. She watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from his kiss, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Willow's first week of teaching passed in a whirlwind of activity. The children were curious about their new teacher, bombarding her with questions about Kansas and her life before coming to Leadville. She found she enjoyed their energy and enthusiasm, even when it occasionally veered toward chaos. Miss Taylor, the primary teacher, proved to be a helpful mentor, a woman in her 30s with a pragmatic approach to education and a dry sense of humor that made Willow laugh. By Thursday, Willow felt as though she'd found her place in the small school community. When Friday arrived, the weather cooperated with clear skies and temperatures mild enough for an outdoor picnic. The schoolyard was transformed with blankets spread on the ground and baskets of food laid out on makeshift tables. Parents mingled with teachers and children, creating a festive atmosphere. Willow was helping a group of younger children organize a game of tag when she spotted Dawson walking across the schoolyard. He'd visited her twice more that week, once for a quiet dinner at the teacherage with Mrs. Bennett present and once for a short walk after school. Each time, she'd found herself more drawn to his steady presence and thoughtful conversation. Marshal Hayes. Several children called out, running to greet him. It was clear he was well liked by the students. Is that your beau, Miss Lambert? Asked 8-year-old Sally Thompson, her eyes wide with interest. Willow felt her cheeks warm. Marshal Hayes is a friend, Sally. My ma says he's the most eligible bachelor in Leadville, the girl informed her seriously. She says it's a shame he hasn't found a wife yet. Sally, Willow admonished gently, though she couldn't help but smile at the child's forthright manner. Well, he is looking at you an awful lot, Sally observed before running off to join the game of tag. Dawson approached, his smile making her heart beat faster. Good afternoon, Miss Lambert. Marshal Hayes, she replied, matching his formal tone though her eyes sparkled with amusement. I'm glad you could join us. I wouldn't miss it. He glanced around at the bustling schoolyard. Quite a turnout. It seems to be a community tradition. Miss Taylor says they hold these picnics at the beginning and end of each term. They walked together toward the food tables, where parents had laid out an impressive spread of fried chicken, biscuits, pies, and other homemade delicacies. Miss Lambert, called Mrs. Peterson, one of the mothers. "We've been dying to meet the new teacher. Come sit with us." Willow found herself swept into a circle of mothers, who peppered her with questions about her background, her teaching methods, and with increasingly unsubtle hints her relationship with the Marshal. "Marshal Hayes has been so helpful since I arrived in Leadville," she said diplomatically, aware of Dawson's amused gaze from where he stood chatting with a group of fathers nearby. "I'll bet he has," Mrs. Peterson said with a knowing smile. "He's never shown such interest in any of the other new arrivals." Willow was saved from responding by the arrival of Mrs. Bennet, who directed the conversation toward the upcoming spring concert. After eating, the children organized races and games, with adults serving as both participants and judges. "Marshal, you should join the three-legged race," called out Mr. Thompson, Sally's father. "Miss Lambert needs a partner." Before she could protest, Willow found herself standing next to Dawson as a length of rope was tied around their adjacent ankles, binding them together. "I apologize in advance," Dawson murmured close to her ear. "I haven't done this since I was a boy." "Neither have I," she admitted, acutely aware of his arm around her waist to steady her. The race was chaotic, with pairs of adults and children stumbling and laughing as they tried to coordinate their movements across the schoolyard. Willow and Dawson found their rhythm quickly, moving in surprising synchronicity. "Left, right, left," Dawson counted softly, his grip on her waist secure but gentle. They crossed the finish line third, behind two pairs of nimble children, but ahead of all the other adults. As Mr. Thompson untied the rope binding them, Willow found herself reluctant to step away from Dawson's embrace. The picnic continued until mid-afternoon, when parents began gathering their children and heading home. Willow stayed to help clean up, and Dawson remained as well, carrying tables back to the school building and folding blankets. "That was fun," he said as they walked back to the teacherage after everything was put away. "I can't remember the last time I participated in something so normal." "Normal? Most of my interactions with people involve some kind of trouble," he explained. "It's nice to just enjoy a community event without having to break up a fight or arrest someone," she laughed. "I suppose that would get tiresome." They reached the teacherage, but instead of saying goodbye, Dawson asked, "Would you like to go for a ride tomorrow? The weather's supposed to be fine, and there's a spot in the hills with a view of the entire valley. I could pack a lunch." The idea of spending more time with him, away from the watchful eyes of the town, was appealing. "I'd like that very much, but I don't have a horse. I can borrow one from the livery stable, gentle, I promise." "Then yes, I'd love to." His smile warmed her from the inside out. "I'll come by at 10. That night, as Willow prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about how quickly her life had changed. Just over a week ago, she had been desperate and alone, forced to consider a life she'd never wanted. Now she had a position she enjoyed, a comfortable place to live and friends in the community, and she had Dawson. Whatever was growing between them was still new and fragile, but it filled her with hope and a happiness she hadn't experienced in a long time. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of his smile as he'd said goodbye, the promise of tomorrow making her heart light. The morning dawned clear and mild, unusual for February in the mountains, but welcome. Willow dressed carefully in her best riding skirt. Thankfully, she'd brought it from Kansas, though she hadn't expected to have much use for it in Leadville, and a warm woolen jacket. She braided her hair and pinned it up, securing it with her mother's tortoiseshell combs. Dawson arrived precisely at 10, leading 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a smaller bay mare. "This is Daisy," he said, helping Willow mount the mare. "She belongs to Judge Parker's daughter, but she's away at school in Denver. The judge was happy to let you borrow her for the day." "She's lovely," Willow said, patting the mare's neck. The horse was indeed gentle, standing patiently as Willow adjusted her skirts and got comfortable in the saddle. They rode out of town, heading west toward the mountains. Leadville sat at an elevation of over 10,000 feet, surrounded by peaks that rose even higher, their snow-capped summits gleaming in the sunlight. As they left the bustling streets behind, the landscape opened up around them: pine forests, meadows still covered in snow, and breathtaking vistas at every turn. "It's beautiful," Willow said, inhaling deeply. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and something distinctly alpine. "So different from Kansas. Do you miss it?" Dawson asked. "Kansas, I mean," she considered the question. "I miss what it was, my home with my parents, the familiarity of it. But after they died, it wasn't the same. Too many memories, I suppose," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes a fresh start is what we need." "What about you?" she asked. "Where's home for you?" "I was born in Missouri, but we moved around a lot when I was young. My father worked on the railroads." A shadow passed over his face at the mention of his father. "After the war, I never really settled anywhere until I came to Colorado." "And now, is Leadville home?" He glanced at her, something warming in his gaze. "It's starting to feel that way." They rode for about an hour, climbing steadily through forests and across meadows until they reached a promontory overlooking the valley. Below them, Leadville spread out like a patchwork quilt, smoke rising from chimneys, the streets laid out in neat grids. "This is breathtaking," Willow said as they dismounted. Dawson tied the horses to a pine tree where they could graze on the patches of grass visible through the melting snow. "I found this spot during my first month in Leadville," he said, spreading a blanket on a relatively dry area. "I come here to think sometimes. And you're sharing it with me?" she asked, touched by the gesture. "I wanted you to see Leadville as I see it." He unpacked the lunch he'd brought: sandwiches, apples, and a bottle of lemonade. "From up here, you can see its potential, not just what it is now." They sat side by side on the blanket, eating and talking as the sun moved across the sky. Dawson told her stories about the early days of the silver boom, about the characters he'd met as a marshal, about his dreams of someday building a home outside of town. "Nothing fancy," he said. "Just a place of my own with some land, maybe a few horses." "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. He looked at her, something hesitant in his expression. "Willow, I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know that I care for you more than I expected to." Her heart skipped a beat. "I care for you too." "I'm not good with words like this," he admitted, "but being with you this past week it's been the happiest I can remember being in a long time." She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "I feel the same way." His eyes dropped to her lips, and she knew he wanted to kiss her. Part of her wanted that too, wanted it with an intensity that surprised her. But another part, the practical teacher who valued her reputation in the community, knew that such a step shouldn't be taken lightly. As if sensing her thoughts, Dawson squeezed her hand gently and stood, pulling her to her feet. "We should head back. The days are still short, and I don't want to risk getting caught out after dark." The ride back to town was quieter, but comfortably so. They spoke of simple things: the children at school, the book of poetry he'd given her, plans for the coming week. By the time they reached the teacherage, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snowy ground. Dawson helped her dismount, his hands strong at her waist. For a moment he didn't let go, and they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath on her face. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "Thank you for coming with me." His eyes searched hers. "Willow, I'd like to call on you properly if you'll allow it." She knew what he was asking permission to court her formally, with the understanding that his intentions were serious. "I'd like that very much." Relief and happiness spread across his face. "Tomorrow's Sunday. May I escort you to church?" "Yes," she said, smiling up at him. "I'd be honored." He took her hand and, as he had that first evening, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. But this time, he turned her hand over and placed a second kiss in her palm, the gesture intimate in a way that made her breath catch. "Until tomorrow," he said, his voice deeper than usual. As she watched him lead the horses away, her hand still tingling from his kiss, Willow knew that her life had changed in yet another profound way. The man who had rescued her from the saloon was becoming so much more than just her savior. He was becoming the person she wanted to build a future with. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of teaching, community events, and increasingly frequent outings with Dawson. March brought warmer weather to the mountains, the snow beginning to melt in patches, revealing the first hints of green beneath. As the days lengthened, so did the time Willow and Dawson spent together. He escorted her to church each Sunday, dined with her at the teacherage several times a week, always with either Mrs. Bennet or Miss Taylor present as chaperone, and took her for rides in the hills when weather permitted. The town quickly accepted them as a couple, and Willow found herself receiving knowing smiles from shopkeepers and mothers of her students whenever Dawson's name was mentioned. One evening in early April, they sat on the small porch of the teacherage, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Mrs. Bennet was visiting friends, and Miss Taylor had tactfully retreated to her room after dinner, giving them a rare moment of privacy. "Spring is coming," Dawson observed, his shoulder touching Willow's as they sat side by side on the porch swing. "The passes will be clear soon." "Is that good for the town?" Willow asked, enjoying the simple pleasure of being near him. "It means more supplies can get through more travelers." "Business picks up." He hesitated, then added, "It also means I'll need to make a trip to Denver soon." She turned to look at him. "Denver, for how long?" "A week, perhaps 2. There's a trial I need to testify at." His expression was apologetic. "I've put it off as long as I could, but the judge is insistent." "I understand," she said, though the thought of him being gone for so long made her heart sink. "It's your duty." He took her hand, running his thumb across her knuckles in a way that had become familiar and cherished. "I'll miss you." "I'll miss you too." She leaned her head against his shoulder, propriety be damned. They'd been courting long enough that such small intimacies seemed natural, even necessary. "Willow," he said, his voice low and serious, "before I go, there's something I want to ask you." Her heart began to race. "Yes," he shifted to face her, taking both her hands in his. "These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Being with you, it's made me see what I want for my future, who I want to share it with." She could hardly breathe. "Dawson, I love you, Willow. I think I started falling in love with you that first night at the saloon, when you stood on that stage with such dignity despite everything. And every day since then, I've only grown to love you more." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I love you too." His face lit up with joy. "I don't have much to offer yet. My salary as a marshal is decent but not lavish. I've been saving for land, but it will take time to build a proper home. But if you're willing to wait to build that future with me—" "Are you asking me to marry you?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "Yes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, a simple silver band with a single small diamond. "It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Tears spilled onto her cheeks. "Yes. Oh, Dawson, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you now? I've wanted to since the moment I met you." "Please," she breathed. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion as she responded eagerly. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and she melted against him, her heart soaring with happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for a very long time," she laughed softly. "So have I." They stayed on the porch until stars filled the sky, planning their future together. Dawson would leave for Denver in 3 days and return as quickly as possible. They would announce their engagement formally after his return, with a wedding perhaps in the summer. "Nothing elaborate," Willow assured him. "Just our friends here in Leadville." "Whatever you want," he said, kissing her again simply because he could. "As long as you're my wife at the end of it." The night before Dawson was set to leave for Denver, a late spring snowstorm swept through the mountains, blanketing Leadville in several inches of fresh snow. Despite the weather, he came to the teacherage for a farewell dinner with Willow, Mrs. Bennet, and Miss Taylor. "The stage will still run tomorrow," he assured Willow as they stood at the door, saying their goodbyes. "The company knows how to handle these conditions." "Just be careful," she said, squeezing his hands. They had decided to keep their engagement private until his return, so her ring was safely tucked away in a drawer in her room. Still, Mrs. Bennet and Miss Taylor had given them a moment of privacy, retreating to the kitchen on the pretense of doing dishes. "I will." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, briefly but tenderly. 2 weeks. I'll be back before you know it." But 2 weeks came and went with no sign of Dawson. A telegram arrived from Denver saying the trial had been delayed due to the illness of a key witness, and he would be another week. Willow tried to hide her disappointment, focusing instead on her teaching and preparations for the spring concert. 3 weeks after his departure, a second telegram arrived. The trial had concluded, but he was needed for another matter. He would return as soon as possible. As April turned to May, Willow's worry grew. She wrote letters to him care of the marshal's office in Denver, but received only brief replies that explained little about what was keeping him. "I'm sure there's a good reason," Mrs. Bennet assured her one evening as they sat in the teacherage parlor, grading arithmetic tests. The older woman had guessed about their engagement, though Willow hadn't confirmed it. "Marshal Hayes is a man of his word." "I know," Willow said, trying to sound confident. "I just wish he'd tell me more about what's happening." "Men and their work," Mrs. Bennet said with a knowing smile. "My late husband was the same way. He'd get so caught up in his business that he'd forget the world existed outside it." The next day, as Willow was walking home from school, she noticed unusual activity at the Silver Dollar Saloon. A crowd had gathered outside, and she caught snippets of excited conversation. "Arrested in Denver. Trafficking ring. Girls from all over the territory." Her heart began to race. Could this be related to Dawson's extended stay in Denver? She approached Mrs. Peterson, who stood at the edge of the crowd with several other women. "What's happening?" "Oh, Miss Lambert, haven't you heard? They've arrested Mr. Barton. Apparently, he's been involved in some terrible business selling young women to houses of ill repute in Denver and beyond. The marshal there telegraphed our deputy this morning." "Marshal Hayes," Willow said, realization dawning. "He's been investigating this." Mrs. Peterson nodded eagerly. "So they say. Word is he's been working on this case for months, gathering evidence. They arrested Barton's partners in Denver last week, and now they've come for him." Willow watched as Deputy Wilson and another man led a handcuffed Barton from the saloon. The former saloon owner looked diminished somehow, his face pale and his shoulders slumped. "They say there were ledgers," Mrs. Peterson continued, lowering her voice. "With names of girls, prices paid, some as young as 14. Isn't it awful?" Willow felt sick. She thought of how close she had come to being trapped in Barton's web, how different her life might have been if Dawson hadn't intervened that night. Later that evening, a telegram arrived at the teacherage. Willow's hands trembled as she opened it. "Case concluded. Stop returning tomorrow. Stop all my love. Stop." Dawson. Relief washed over her. He was coming home, and he'd signed it with "all my love," a public declaration that made her cheeks flush with pleasure. The next afternoon, Willow stood at the stage depot with a small crowd of townspeople, all eager to hear firsthand about the arrests in Denver. When the stage rolled in, dust swirling around the wheels, her eyes searched for only one person. Dawson stepped down from the stage, looking tired but triumphant. Their eyes met across the depot, and his face broke into a smile that made her heart skip. He spoke briefly to Deputy Wilson, then made his way directly to her, ignoring the others who tried to catch his attention. "Willow," he said, taking her hands in his, "I've missed you." "I've missed you too," she replied, conscious of the curious eyes watching them but too happy to care. "I heard about Mr. Barton. It's over," he said simply. "He and his associates won't hurt any more young women." "I'm proud of you," she told him, meaning every word. "Though I wish you'd told me what you were working on." "I wanted to," he admitted, "but I couldn't risk word getting back to Barton, and honestly, I didn't want to worry you with the details." He squeezed her hands. "Forgive me for being away so long." "There's nothing to forgive. You were doing your duty." She smiled up at him. "But I'm very glad you're home." "Home," he repeated, his eyes warm as they held hers. "Yes, I am." Later, after he'd cleaned up from his journey and reported to the town officials, Dawson and Willow walked along the edge of town, making up for lost time. He told her about the investigation, how they'd tracked girls who had disappeared from saloons across Colorado territory and beyond, how they'd finally gathered enough evidence to make the arrests. "It started with my sister," he explained as they sat on a fallen log overlooking a small creek. After she died, I promised myself I'd do something about men like Barton. When I came to Leadville and heard the rumors about girls going missing from the Silver Dollar, I knew I had to investigate. But I never expected it to be so extensive, to involve so many people. Or to take so long, she added gently. No. He took her hand, running his thumb over where her ring would soon be. I'm sorry for that. Being away from you was harder than I expected. You're here now, she said. That's what matters. He reached into his pocket and pulled out her ring. May I? She nodded, her heart full as he slipped it onto her finger where it belonged. It's perfect. You're perfect, he said, drawing her close for a kiss that spoke of homecoming and promises kept. The following Sunday, Reverend Adams made the announcement at the end of the church service. I'm pleased to share that our own Marshal Dawson Hayes and Miss Willow Lambert have announced their engagement. They plan to be married here in June. Let us offer them our congratulations and best wishes for their future together. The congregation erupted in applause and well wishes. As they walked out of the church, people stopped to congratulate them, the women already discussing plans for the wedding celebration. Are you happy? Dawson asked as they strolled back toward the teacherage, his arm linked through hers. Willow looked up at him, at the man who had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined when she first arrived in Leadville. Happier than I've ever been. Good, he said, his smile tender. Because making you happy is what I plan to do for the rest of our lives. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. The entire town seemed invested in their happiness, with gifts arriving daily at the teacherage, hand-embroidered linens, cooking utensils, a beautiful quilt made by the mothers of Willow's students. Dawson, meanwhile, had been busy with plans of his own. I want to show you something, he said one Saturday in early June, helping her into the saddle of the borrowed mare that had become her regular mount. A surprise. He led her out of town, following a different path than their usual rides. After about 20 minutes, they crested a small hill and came upon a clearing beside a stream. In the center of the clearing stood the frame of a house, just the basic structure, walls partially constructed, but clearly the beginning of a home. Dawson, Willow breathed, taking in the scene. Is this our home? He confirmed, his expression a mixture of pride and nervousness. If you like it, I've been working on it whenever I could get away. Some of the men from town have been helping. She dismounted and walked toward the structure, emotion welling in her chest. The location was perfect, close enough to town for convenience but far enough for privacy, with the stream providing water and the surrounding forest offering shelter and beauty. It's not much yet, he continued, following her, but by the end of summer it should be ready. 2 bedrooms to start, with room to add on as we need to. The implication children, a family, made her heart swell. It's wonderful, she said, turning to face him. Absolutely wonderful. Relief washed over his features. I wasn't sure if you'd want to live outside of town. I know the teacherage is convenient for your work. This is perfect, she interrupted. I can still teach, it's not that far, and to have our own home, a place that's ours. She threw her arms around his neck. I couldn't ask for anything more. He held her close, his voice rough with emotion. I want to give you everything, Willow, everything you deserve. You already have, she whispered against his chest. You gave me a second chance when you walked into that saloon. You gave me your heart when I needed it most. The rest is just extra happiness. The day of the wedding dawned clear and warm, the mountains rising majestically against a cloudless blue sky. Willow dressed in her room at the teacherage, assisted by Mrs. Bennet and Miss Taylor. Her gown was simple but elegant, cream colored with lace at the collar and cuffs, purchased with money she'd saved from her teaching salary. You look beautiful, Mrs. Bennet said, adjusting the wreath of wildflowers in Willow's hair. Marshal Hayes won't know what hit him. Willow smiled, too happy for words. She touched the locket at her throat, her mother's locket, the one Dawson had recovered from Barton. Inside, she'd placed a tiny photograph of her parents on one side and left the other empty, waiting for a picture of her and Dawson. The church was filled to capacity when she arrived. It seemed half the town had turned out for the occasion. As the organ began to play and she walked down the aisle on the arm of Judge Parker, who had kindly offered to give her away, Willow had eyes only for Dawson. He stood at the altar in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving her as she approached. The love in his gaze was so palpable she could almost feel it enveloping her, carrying her forward. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Adams began as she reached Dawson's side and their hands joined. "We are gathered here today." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love and faithfulness that brought tears to the eyes of many in attendance. When Dawson slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his voice trembled with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Adams concluded. "Marshal Hayes, you may kiss your bride." Dawson cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, a seal on their promises and a beginning to their life together. The congregation erupted in applause as they turned to face them, hand in hand. The celebration afterward was held in the schoolyard, transformed with ribbons, flowers, and tables laden with food brought by every family in attendance. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears of joy. As the sun began to set, Dawson led Willow to the center of the makeshift dance floor. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. "You may, Marshal Hayes," she replied, stepping into his arms. As they moved slowly to the music, oblivious to the smiling faces around them, Dawson whispered in her ear, "Do you remember the first time we danced?" She nodded. "The three-legged race at the school picnic. Before that," he said softly. "The first time I saw you, you were dancing on that stage surrounded by men who didn't deserve to look at you." She stilled, surprised. "You consider that our first dance, in a way?" His arms tightened around her. "I watched you for only a moment before I knew I had to get you out of there. But in that moment, I saw your courage, your dignity despite everything. I think that's when my heart recognized yours." Tears pricked at her eyes. "From such a terrible beginning to this perfect day." "Sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures," he said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure your days are filled with light." "They already are," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, "because you're in them." As night fell and stars appeared overhead, the newlyweds slipped away from the celebration to begin their life together. Dawson had rented a small cabin outside of town for their first weeks as husband and wife, while construction continued on their home. "Are you happy?" he asked as they stood on the cabin's porch, the sounds of the forest surrounding them. Willow looked up at her husband, this strong, kind man who had saved her in more ways than one, and felt her heart overflow with love. "More than I ever dreamed possible." He lifted her into his arms, making her laugh in surprise. "Then let's begin our happily ever after, Mrs. Hayes." As he carried her across the threshold into their temporary home, Willow knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges life might bring, they would face them together. From the moment he had cleared that saloon and offered his hand, their paths had been intertwined, leading them to this perfect beginning of their life together. 5 years later, Willow stood on the porch of their completed home, watching as Dawson taught their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 1-year-old daughter, Sarah, balanced on Willow's hip, clapping her tiny hands as her brother made a successful circuit of the yard. "Did you see me, Mama?" Thomas called, his face alight with pride. "I did. You're a natural horseman, just like your father," Willow replied, smiling as Dawson's hand remained protectively near the small boy's back. Their home had grown along with their family 4 bedrooms now, with a large kitchen where Willow taught her children their letters and numbers before they were old enough for formal schooling. She still taught at the school in town 3 days a week with Mrs. Bennett, now semi-retired, filling in the other days. Dawson had been appointed chief marshal for the district 2 years ago, a position that kept him busy, but allowed him to be home most evenings. The silver boom had stabilized, and Leadville had matured into a proper city with churches, schools, theaters, and an opera house that had hosted Oscar Wilde during his American tour. The town had changed, and so had they, growing stronger together, building a life filled with love and purpose. There had been challenges, of course. A difficult first pregnancy, a winter when silver prices dropped and money was tight, times when Dawson's work took him away from home and into danger. But through it all, their commitment to each other had only deepened. As Thomas dismounted his pony with Dawson's help and ran toward the house, Willow's hand went to her locket, the one that now contained photographs of both sets of parents on one side and their small family on the other. From such an unlikely beginning, a dance hall girl and the marshal who saved her had come this beautiful life. Dawson approached, lifting Thomas onto his shoulders and leaning in to kiss Sarah's chubby cheek, then Willow's lips. "What are you thinking about, looking so thoughtful?" he asked. She smiled at him, at the laugh lines that had formed around his eyes and the few strands of silver that had appeared at his temples. He was even more handsome to her now than on that first night, his face reflecting the life they'd built together. "I was thinking about how far we've come," she said, "and how grateful I am that you walked into that saloon 5 years ago." His eyes softened with understanding. "Best decision I ever made," he said, slipping his free arm around her waist, "though asking you to marry me comes in a close second." Thomas tugged at his father's hair. "Papa, can we show Mama the surprise now?" "Surprise?" Willow raised an eyebrow. "What surprise?" Dawson winked at their son. "I suppose we could if your Mama promises to act surprised when you give it to her on her birthday tomorrow." "I promise," Willow said solemnly. Thomas squirmed until Dawson set him down, then ran into the house, returning moments later with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "We made it for you, Mama. Papa helped, but I did most of it." She handed Sarah to Dawson and knelt to accept the gift, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a small wooden music box. When she opened the lid, it played a familiar tune, the same melody the piano player had been playing that night at the saloon. But instead of bringing back painful memories, the tune had been transformed into something beautiful, a reminder of the moment her life had changed for the better. "It's perfect," she whispered, blinking back tears of joy as she hugged Thomas tightly. "The most perfect gift." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Willow and Dawson sat on their porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the stars emerge above the mountains. "Are you still happy?" he asked, echoing the question he had asked so many times over the years. She leaned into him, content in a way she once would have thought impossible. "Every day with you is happier than the last." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That night at the saloon, when I first saw you, I had no idea I was looking at my future, my everything." "Neither did I," she said softly. "I thought it was the worst night of my life. Instead, it was the beginning of the best." As the music box played softly in the background, and their children slept peacefully inside the home they'd built together, Willow and Dawson shared a kiss that held the promise of all the years to come, years that would be filled with love, family, and the kind of happiness that comes from finding your perfect partner in the most unexpected place. From a forced dance in a smoke-filled saloon to this moment of perfect contentment, their journey had been extraordinary. And as the stars shone down upon them, they both knew that the best was still to come.